It started on a wet autumn night in Sham Shui Pe, when the hawker stalls were packing their tarps and the neon signs buzzed like tired cicadas in the drizzle. Ming, a Form 5 student who treated exams like optional festivals, cut through the alleys after football practice with his cleats knocking against his backpack and a bottle of lemon tea sweating in his hand. He liked small crimes against boredom, skipping out a station early and tailgating the turnstile, ding-dong ditching gated walk-ups, and best of all, payphone pranks. There was something about the way a ring tunneled through the city, like casting a line into black water and waiting for anything to bite. On Payho Street, next to a pawn shop window full of jade bracelets and tinny golden dragons, stood an old glass booth with a tube light that flickered in a rhythm that felt not quite electrical, not quite alive. The metal had been repainted so many times that the edges looked soft, like bread left out too long. Beneath the receiver, ash from burned joss paper had blown into a crescent, as if the wind had tried to draw a smile and then got shy. Ming propped the lemon tea on the coin box, fed a coin into the slit, and dialed a number born of habit and impulse. Third ring. A man answered, already irritated, as if he'd been expecting the wrong call. "Hello." Ming lowered his voice into that practiced, lazy baritone he used for strangers. "I'm downstairs. Gate's stuck." "Come down." A beat, then the man exhaled a resigned little sigh. "Which gate?" Ming pictured a middle-aged face frowning into a shadowy corridor and let himself grin. "Under the red lamp," he said, and hung up, satisfied by the absurdity of a street that had no red lamps at all. He put the receiver back, then paused. Tucked into the seam behind the plastic rate card was a narrow paper strip, folded once, crease worn white. Ming teased it out with a fingernail. In tight slanted strokes, a phone number ran across the strip. To one side, 3 graphite hearts leaned into one another, each shaded carefully, as if the shading were more important than the digits. He turned it over, nothing. It smelled faintly like old wallet's smell, warm and a little sweet, a memory of someone's palm. "Lucky," Ming said to no one, and slid it into his wallet behind his student octopus card. He told himself it was a souvenir of the night he fooled a man under a lamp that didn't exist. Curiosity has a specific weight in the hand. It's the weight of one more coin. He fed it to the booth, dialed the number on the paper, and listened as the ring tone came back slow, like it had to cross a room of water first. On the 4th ring, a woman answered in a voice that carried across distance without strain. "Hello," she said, as if expecting someone who often made her wait and whom she had already forgiven. Ming leaned into the bit. "I'm downstairs," he said, light and playful. "Come open the door." Silence gathered on the line. Then, very softly, "Okay." The line went dead. Ming blinked. No confusion, no anger, not even a question. "No fun." He called back. The line rang and rang with that syrupy lag, and when the voice came, it was the same soft hush, air around it like a room with high windows. "Hello." Ming put a smile into his words. "Hey beautiful, I've been waiting." She breathed a quiet laugh that didn't belong to a joke and hung up. It pricked him, how the moment had slipped out of his hand. He dropped in another coin, irritation turning the prank into a petty ritual. This time, when the connection caught, something had changed. On calls, there is always a residue, a TV murmuring in a neighbor room, a fan ticking, a dog tugging the air. Now there was a listening instead, a room that had decided to breathe only when he did. Ming almost spoke, but her whisper crossed into his left ear though the receiver warmed his right. "Don't move. I'll come find you." The click that followed arrived inside his teeth. He stood very still, hearing the tube lights flicker as footsteps that weren't. A mongrel barked twice down the alley, and then decided against the conversation. Ming set the receiver down and made a face at his reflection in the glass. "Grow up," he told it, and it nodded back, dutiful and pale. He left the booth and moved down the block past the shuttered cha-chan tongue with its laminated menus stacked like thin gravestones. The rain drizzled lighter, as if testing whether anyone would miss it if it stopped. At the corner, something tugged at him to look back. Through the booth's wet glass, beads of rain rounding the edges of the world, a white shape stood inside. A woman, head tilted, gaze raised toward the flickering tube as if reading something written in the light. The hair lay flat and dark against the skull, the dress clung at the knees like polite hands. She did not turn. She did not do anything at all that the nervous part of him could call movement, and still every part of him named her motion. He squeezed the lemon tea bottle until it dented and walked harder, listening to the soft slap of his shoes as if it belonged to someone offbeat behind him. For 3 nights he told himself he didn't think about it. That version of the truth felt light enough to carry to school and back. On the 4th night he woke at 2:43, on the 5th at 3:11, and on the 6th the clock's sideways red digits read 3:03 as the sweat cooled on his ribs. He was Cantonese enough to know people joked, not quite joking, that midnight to 3 was een time, thin time, when doors you didn't know you had might open if you knocked by accident. He didn't tell his mother that the motion sensor in the living room glowed once at 3:08, then again at 3:23, with the air dead still and the windows shut. He didn't tell his father that, in the shower, a darker patch on the curtain held its shape exactly the length of one in-breath and one out before softening to plain steam. He didn't call that number again. He didn't need to. The footsteps started as a courtesy, half a beat behind him on Tai Road as he cut home from practice, matching his pace without the arrogance of overtaking. When he stopped to retie a lace, they waited with him, patient, considerate. When he crossed the road, they stayed on the left, as if the left were theirs by habit. He spun around in the road, and a Toyota's brakes peeled sound off the street. The bumper kissed the inside of his thigh with a gasp of rubber. The driver leaned out and emptied a short vial of curses that smelled like cigarette tar. "You two want to die? Play later," he snapped, and drove off shaking his head hard enough to scatter the rain. Ming stood alone in the white of the headlights. He put his palm on the place the bumper had not quite touched, and felt his own pulse working like a dog that had chased him home without asking. At home, Ming took the paper strip from his wallet and set it under his desk lamp. The hearts had bled at the edges, graphite turning to a smudge like watered ink. He dreamed the booth every night after that, dream after dream where the receiver swung and tapped the glass, tap, pause, tap, like a teacher with a ruler waiting for a class to quiet. When the tap stopped, the whisper started, not angry, not even quite sad, just a request worn down to its bones. "Give it back." He dug through every time he had borrowed without asking. The kanji spoon wrapped in a napkin from a cha-chan tung, a train of plastic shopping bags he told himself the store wouldn't miss. Only the strip moved in his mind when the whisper said back. He told himself to burn it. That was how these stories resolved in places that still remembered smoky altars and the soft pursed breath of incense starting. He folded the strip once, twice, feeling the paper grow more obedient with each crease, then unfolded it again and laid it flat as if apologizing for the pressure. The digits felt suddenly unnecessary, like clothes left behind by a swimmer already out past the buoys. He slid it into his wallet, then took it out. He put it in the drawer, then took it out. He laid it under the desk lamp and turned the light off, so he wouldn't have to watch it watch him. The next afternoon, his father's cough returned with that stubborn wetness that made the house sound older. Ming cycled to the herbal tea shop on Yuchao Street, where the Annie with the perm and the neon scrunchie ran the till and scolded the clock. She packed the herbs in paper and, like aunties do, added more words than the transaction required. "Good boy," she said, weighing the bag with her palm. "Take some butter cookies for your girlfriend La. She's waiting outside." Ming's mouth worked around air. He had not locked the bicycle because he had not come with anyone who could ride away on it. He took the cookies. He did not explain anything to anyone. He walked the bike back along the pavement, the pedals ticking against the chain as if another pair of steps had taken up the rhythm and wouldn't be rude enough to stop first. That night, the hour split again like a wink, and Ming found himself sitting up in bed with his trainers already waiting under his hand. Decisions sometimes arrive fully made, like taxis already idling downstairs that you don't remember calling. He slid the strip into his pocket, crept out, and walked the road that had been rehearsed for him across 6 days of not quite sleep. The booth held its place under the tube light, the flicker steady enough to be trusted. Someone was already inside, bending at the knees to peer into the crack under the directory, running a finger along the seam where glass met aluminum, blowing breath into the coin slot as if warming hands. Not calling. Searching. Up close, the man looked washed by the same rain that had rinsed the streets for days. Hair pushed flat, windbreaker dotted darker at the shoulders, eyes bright with the kind of wakefulness that doesn't mean energy. Ming stood at the door, then pushed it half open with 2 fingers. "Gore," he said, the Cantonese honorific falling out of his mouth like he had meant to say mister, and his tongue had chosen the word a brother might deserve. "Are you looking for this?" He held out the folded strip. The man didn't take it at first. He closed his eyes like the paper had spoken a name it wasn't supposed to know, then opened them as if that, too, had been a choice he had made a long time ago. He took the strip with both hands. "Thank you," he said, voice soft and cracked on the edges. I hoped it would still be here. He slid the strip into a small red envelope from his pocket, the kind given at New Year and weddings, the red bright as if it had its own light. He patted it once, not like money, like a small animal that might startle and run. Ming waited for the rest without asking for it. The man looked at the booth's floor, then at the receiver in its cradle, then at the place behind the rate card where the seam still held a mark of absence. It's not the digits, he said, answer to a question Ming hadn't given a voice. I know them by heart. He lifted the envelope a little, the motion apologetic and proud at the same time. It's the hand that wrote them. It listens when I can't sleep. He touched the metal cradle with 2 fingers, a gesture that felt like a bow, then stepped out into the damp air with a thank you that sounded like he meant it for both the boy and the booth. Ming did not follow. He stood in the glass square and waited for the tube light to buzz, but it did not. The booth had gone back to being merely a shelter from a light rain. When Ming got home, he slept through 3 a.m. for the first time in a week. The motion sensor obeyed the room's emptiness. In the morning, the lemon tea tasted only like lemon and tea. He put his wallet in his pocket, and it felt like a wallet does when it carries only what belongs to it. He did not tell anyone anything. There was nothing in the shape of words he would trust to carry this without spilling. On his way to school, he walked past the booth and kept his eyes level. It would be a long time before he understood that some debts are settled with small returns and a quiet. For now, it was enough that the day had put its feet back under it and stood. The week after the booth went quiet, the city decided to be kind. Skies opened blue like rinsed bowls, laundry snapped from balconies like flags that didn't know they were ordinary, and the minibus drivers honked less as if they had been given new lungs and were saving them. Ming made it to school on time 2 mornings in a row, and the PE teacher, who believed in punctuality the way other men believed in God, nodded at him as if they shared something. The night terrors didn't just stop, they forgot how to spell his name. He woke after 6, blinked at light that had no story in it, and tasted breakfast without checking his tongue for rust. On the 3rd good morning he told himself, that was nothing, and the 4th morning agreed. But stories are not lines. They are tied. On the 5th night, Ming fell asleep to the murmur of the building's pipes, each apartment washing itself with the same water and the same tired vows of quiet. He woke to the booth ringing. Not the one in his street, this was the booth inside his head, glass cleaned by a rain that never finished, the tube light bright enough to make the moths think better thoughts. Ring. He could tell it was daytime in the dream because shadows were short on the pavement, and the pawn shop gold in the window had stopped pretending to be anything but metal. The phone rang like a decision made by someone else. He lifted the receiver in a body that was his and not his, and the same voice as the first night exhaled 2 words that pulled like a thread from behind his breastbone. Thank you. Ming tried to answer and woke with his own name in his mouth like a coin. He sat up, listening to the shape the room had when it was sure of itself. For a long, slow minute, he believed the story was done. At football practice the next day, his first touch went a little too far, and his second touch went nowhere. The ball scraped the inside of his ankle and made an hourglass of blood that looked deeper than it was. The coach shouted his name like a borrowed scold and waved him to the bench without the anger to carry it all the way. Ming pressed the edge of his shin pad into the skin until the sting felt like an argument he could win. He kept thinking about the dream's gratitude and how gratitude doesn't usually have the hands to hold a receiver. He told himself to let go of it the way a hand lets go of a stair rail when it no longer needs to climb. On the minibus home, a woman in a white blouse sat across from him and didn't meet his eyes once, which is how people meet in cities. At the next stop, a different woman in a different white blouse got on, and for a moment Ming's stomach slipped because the collar sat the same. Wrong side pressed flat, right side folded back slightly like a wave. He looked again and the fold was nothing, a trick of a passing shadow. He laughed under his breath at his own vigilance and made a promise to be less careful. Promises are a kind of glass. They don't like to be leaned on. Ming started cutting down Hawker Stage Road again, the route that passed the booth but pretended not to. The first night, he kept his eyes on the sky between towers and told himself constellations matter more than corners. As he went by the pawn shop window, the same one with tinny golden dragons and bracelets that had once looked like a joke told in metal, its light blinked in the drizzle, and his face slid across the glass like a subtitle. The booth did not ring. The tube light burned like a tube light. The second night his phone buzzed in his pocket and made him flinch, and his friend's text said only, You still owe me fish balls." The third night the motion sensor at home stayed dark and his mother said, "Good, finally, the battery learned discipline." He said, "Yes," and made his voice a place where jokes could sit without falling. The fourth night, Ming reached the booth and found the receiver slightly crooked in its cradle, as if it had been put down by someone who didn't want to wake it. He corrected it with 2 fingers because that is what you do with small wrongs when big wrongs are not in the room. He saw then, without trying to see, a smear high on the glass, the kind of mark a forehead makes when it rests itself where it shouldn't. He tilted his head, and the smear became only someone's breath remembered by dust. He walked on, and the city unrolled itself under his feet like a mat. Sleep learned new shapes. He dreamt not of the booth, but of the places a booth could have been. A call box on an empty pier, where ropes lay like sleeping snakes and the water made the sound of rice washing itself. A public phone under a footbridge where schoolkids cut their hair into a circle of friends with plastic scissors. A handset in an estate corridor, green paint peeling at the corners as if the wall had smiled too hard for too long. In each dream, he picked up and waited, and sometimes the voice said nothing, and sometimes the silence said what a voice would have said if it had been allowed. "Give it back," the old refrain came, but gentler now, like a hand on a sleeve, not a grip. Ming woke with the taste of iron, and couldn't tell if it had been fear or blood from a bitten lip, that he told himself this was a residue, a habit, a brain rinsing itself in old water. He told himself to stop entertaining the dead like they were door-to-door salesmen. He told himself words that had worked on him before. Then the city decided to lean. On Sunday he followed his mother to the wet market, carrying a bag that fought his fingers with scales and fish eyes. At the fishmonger's counter, the woman wrapped their purchase and said, "Add $2 for your girlfriend. She's waiting outside with the basket." Ming turned his head too fast and saw only a knot of umbrellas, all of them black like a flock of tame night. He paid and carried the bag and let the water run between his knuckles like a lesson. He didn't ask his mother if she had heard what he had heard. He didn't ask himself if he trusted the market's mouth. Monday at school, a rumor moved like a lizard along the classroom walls. A Form 3 boy had jumped from a footbridge near Sham Shui Pu. It had happened at night, and someone who claimed to know someone said that 2 shadows had been seen walking beside him the day before, as if he were late and needed shepherding. Ming swallowed the rumor and felt it sit in him like a coin not meant to be spent. He kept his eyes on the board and copied a date he would not remember into a margin that would forget him first. That night it rained like a conversation that refused to end. Water had that old habit of finding its level. Sound had that older habit of finding the ear that did not want it. Ming lay awake, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder like a boy measuring distance to a war he was not drafted for. At 1:27 he rose. Not for the booth, for water. He poured himself a glass in the kitchen and watched the green pilot light on the gas water heater tremble a little, then steady itself the way a breath steadies when a thought has been admitted into the room. He turned and the corridor light at the end glowed on. Motion sensor. He waited for it to apologize and go dark. It did not. He walked toward it. Now and then in apartment corridors, the light's timing is off and it catches you half a second after you've entered its idea of a space. This was not that. He stood dead center. The light swelled brighter as if pleased. Then it dimmed. He felt the burnt sugar smell of old plastic warming. He looked down the length of the corridor and saw his own shadow reach forward, split, and settle back into itself like a bird thinking better of a particular sky. At 2:03 the building exhaled. Pipes ticked. Somewhere, a lift decided to sleep on a floor. He lay in bed and thought of the word thank you, and whether it had finished being said. He closed his eyes and saw the smeared forehead mark on the booth glass at a height that did not match his own. He measured it without a ruler and could not help concluding. He opened his eyes and the room had not moved, which felt like kindness. He slept because bodies are not built to carry entire nights in their hands. At 3:12 the phone rang. Not his mobile, which lay dead-faced on the desk, but a ring that had the shape of a handset with cord, the sound of a weight in a cradle that had learned to both fall and land. He sat up and listened to a ring that lived not in the air, but in the memory the air had of phones. It rang again, and he understood that the sound came not from his room, but from the stairwell outside his flat. The old emergency phone box the management had never removed, yellowed plastic behind a cracked, clear door. Ming moved to the door in bare feet and put his eye to the peephole. The corridor wore its silence well. The light halfway down flickered, and this time he knew it was electricity because the flicker had the confidence to repeat itself without variation. The phone rang again, and the ring came from below, 1 floor or two. He put his hand on the deadbolt and felt the cool of metal say, "Not yet." Morning made of the night a rumor that did not quote its sources. Ming went to school, came back, went to practice, came back. On the way home, he avoided the booth because avoidance is a form of control men forgive themselves for. But the city had widenings and narrowings built into it that did not ask permission. Near the old public library, a payphone that had been part of the wall since the 90s blinked its tiny red LED, as if it remembered how to announce itself. As he approached, it rang. It was early afternoon. Children squabbled over a plastic ball nearby. A woman argued with a delivery driver about a box that had been promised a different shape. The phone rang a second time, and Ming looked around to see who would answer a relic. No one. The third ring found his hand. He lifted the handset, because a body wants to complete an offered motion. "Hello," he said, voice polite, buying time. The line thrummed with the sound of a large room being careful. "You returned it," the woman said, and it was the relief that follows fear, not the thanks that follows favor. Ming swallowed, and the sound of his swallow lived on the line longer than it should have. "I didn't know it was yours," he said. He meant, "I am sorry, I thought there were no owners in a city of strangers." "It was ours," she said, and around the word ours was the faint laugh he had heard the first night, but now the laugh had learned to live without a mouth. The line thinned. "Don't call again," she added after a breath. The receiver clicked, and Ming realized he had not dialed anything at all. He stood there with a dead handset in a live hand, looking at his own reflection in the small metal plate where the card slot had been. Behind his head, the afternoon brightened carelessly. He set the handset back. The LED went dark. He stepped away and the LED woke again, a dot of heart under plastic. He didn't turn back. That evening his father's cough loosened, and his mother said the herbs were finally doing their job. Ming wanted to ask whether jobs could be finished or only change titles. He cleaned his boots, lined them up by the door, and thought about the driver who had seen two figures and had called them foolish. He thought about the Annie who had offered cookies to someone he hadn't brought. He thought about the forehead smear at the wrong height, and the way that height put the mouth at the mouthpiece if the mouth had leaned. He went to bed early and told himself a boy who sleeps early does not hear phones that do not ring. Sometime after the hour had stopped standing and started walking, Ming found himself at the booth again without remembering the steps he had used to arrive. Rain had started, but was not yet serious. The tube light held steady, as if it had recently been told a secret and had promised. The receiver lay in its bed, obedient, and the glass wore no new marks, except the old one, the same high smear now thinned to a pale crescent, like a healed bruise the glass refused to forget. He stepped into the booth and closed the door. The silence inside the glass was a different brand from the silence outside. He could feel the city scrubbing its teeth with noise a little ways away. In here, breath was opinion. He looked at the seam behind the rate card where the paper had once lived, and felt the small emptiness that comes when a space forgets what it had been assigned to hold. The phone did not ring. He lifted the receiver anyway and placed it to his right ear, then his left, as if he were testing which side of the world he had left open. He did not dial. He did not breathe for a count of 3. A whisper found him, not from the line but from the pane, as if words could fog glass. "You returned it," it said again, softer now, a verification. "So why are you still here?" Ming lowered the handset and saw, reflected in the glass, a shape behind his own that did not overlap with him. Not taller, not shorter, simply misaligned like a subtitle lagging the film. He turned and found the booth empty except for the boy it held. When he faced the glass again, the misalignment persisted for a breath, and then caught up with him like a friend jogging the last steps to match pace. He placed the receiver back with care. He stepped out into a rain that had made a decision. He did not run. He walked as if speed were a kind of confession. The footsteps behind him matched him without enthusiasm, which is worse than malice because it cannot be argued with. At the corner by the pawn shop window, the same dragons, the same bracelets. His reflection reached the glass a half beat before he did and hung there, waiting. He stopped. It did not. It smiled just a little, as if to suggest an arrangement. The tube light inside the booth bloomed to full, steady white. From across the street, the payphone rang twice, then once in his left ear only. He closed his eyes and heard a second line pick up. Morning opened like a clean envelope. Ming woke with the memory of a ring that didn't belong to his room, and the knowledge that some promises are only strong if nobody checks them. He dressed, left early, and took the long way that still passed the pawn shop window where dragons pretended to be lucky for whoever needed luck to be purchasable. The booth under the flicker stood where it always had, its glass showing the tired city as if it were well rested. He did not intend to go in. He went in. Inside, the silence pressed close as if it had learned his outline. He placed his palms on the cool metal and felt a pulse that was either his or the booth's or the building's. The receiver lay in its cradle with a politeness that felt rehearsed. He lifted it and did not dial. Breath made a small weather in the glass. In the pane ahead of him, his reflection stood a half step to the right, correcting itself when he did, late enough to be seen. "I won't call," he said to it, and the line, which had not woken, woke. No ring. Just connection. A room on the other end arranged itself around the breath of someone who had learned to be careful with rooms. "You came back," the woman said, the words so close to the glass that the faintest fog kissed the pane and vanished. Ming steadied the handset against his ear as if it might float away. "I returned it," he said. "I know," she answered, and this time there was a smile in the voice that did not need a mouth to prove it. "He keeps it by the bed. Sometimes he reads it without looking." Silence poured in and pooled, not empty, only finished. Ming found the question he had been carrying since the first coin. "Why me?" The city exhaled beyond the glass. A minibus made a promise it wouldn't keep. "Because you called," she said, as if that explained the weather. "Because voices travel on the paths they once knew. Because, for a moment, you sounded like him when he was young and late, and sure I would always be there." The tube light hummed. He thought of the red envelope pressed against a windbreaker. He thought of a forehead resting at that same strange height. "I'm sorry," he said, and the word felt correct-sized. "Don't be," she answered, and it wasn't forgiveness so much as a closing of a book. "You returned what wasn't yours. Now return what is." "What is that?" he asked before he could stop himself. "Your voice," she said. He understood then, how the prank had borrowed it and how he had let it be borrowed. He set the receiver back into its cradle, not like placing a tool down, but like laying a small weight where weight belongs. In the reflection, the misalignment loosened. The shape behind his did not try to match him anymore. It turned, if turning is what you call a change in attention, and faced the empty space beside him that was not empty to itself. "Thank you," she said again, and this time it was not to him. It passed through him the way wind passes through laundry, leaving a different shape for a moment, and then the same shape again. Outside the booth, rain began with the hesitation of someone knocking at a door they've already opened. Ming stepped out. The pawn shop dragons watched without having to pretend. He looked back once and saw only glass holding light. On Payphone Street, the wet looked honest. At home, the motion sensor learned his timing and forgot his shadows. His father's cough shrank to an anecdote. His mother said the herbs had done their job and pressed a butter cookie into his palm as if she were fixing a small future. He rode his bicycle after dinner, freewheel ticking like a polite insect, and for the first time the sound belonged only to the wheel and the road and the boy who made both into a way to move. 3 days later, on a bright afternoon that made dust look gold instead of old, a payphone outside the old library rang while Ming waited for a friend. He did not move. A man in a gray windbreaker passing by paused, smiled in a way that tucked itself back into his face, and lifted the handset. "Hello," he said softly, as if talking to a room he recognized by smell. He listened a long moment and laughed once, breath and memory in the same small sound. He said nothing else. When he hung up, he pressed the receiver with 2 fingers like a bow and walked on, red envelope flat against his chest. Ming watched him go, and did not follow. The phone stayed quiet, satisfied. The city turned a corner and took him with it. He did not make prank calls again, not because he was afraid of ghosts, but because he had learned that lines remember. Some carry voices forward, some carry them back, and some, when what was owed has been returned, let go.